I'll make you CEO if you play this piano.
I'll make you CEO if you play this piano. Alexander Whitmore's voice thundered across the grand ballroom of the plaza, dripping with arrogance. Laughter exploded. Crystal glasses chimed, silk gowns rippled, and the wealthy elite leaned in, eager for the spectacle. The target of his mockery was not a rival executive or a socialite in pearls. It was Grace Miller, the cleaning lady in a grey uniform, gripping a mop in her trembling hands. Her cheeks burned as dozens of eyes pierced her, the crowd laughing louder at the absurdity of a maid daring to sit at a Steinway meant for masters. But that night, in the glittering heart of New York City, humiliation was only the opening note. What followed would expose a shocking truth, turn power upside down and leave everyone speechless. Before we begin this emotional story, tell us in the comments which city you are watching from, and don't forget to leave your like so you can keep following our stories. The grand ballroom at the plaza burned with chandelier light, polished like a mirror made of gold. Laughter clinked against crystal flutes. At the center, a jet-black Steinway waited, a glossy continent in a sea of tuxedos. Alexander Whitmore, the billionaire CEO with a grin sharpened by privilege, rested one elbow on the piano lid, as if it were the armrest of a throne. "New York," he called, voice buoyant and cruel, "wants a show." Heads turned toward the edge of the room, where a young cleaning lady paused mid-sweep. Grace Miller's gloved fingers tightened around the wooden handle. Her grey uniform took the light like ash, humble, silent, invisible, until he pointed. A few guests pivoted with predatory curiosity. Brooke Harrington's smile widened, lips like lacquer. "Oh, Alex," she purred, "don't be wicked." Alexander struck a random high key. The note was a pinprick of ice in warm air. "If you can play this piano," he said, lazy and loud enough for phones to tilt and record, "I'll make you CEO by morning. Imagine that. Mopping floors tonight, running Whitmore Capital tomorrow." A ripple of laughter, expensive and mean. Grace stared at the key he'd hit, as if sound still hovered over it like steam. The wooden handle nudged her hip. She held it the way one holds rhythm, tight enough not to drop, loose enough to breathe. Martha Collins, across the room, shook her head once. "Don't." But Grace's jaw set, a small storm gathering behind her lips. "You're kidding, right?" Daniel Price murmured to Alexander, not bothering to hide his delight. "Liability nightmare, unless she surprises us." His tone made surprise sound like a punchline. Olivia Chen glanced over her phone, already framing the optics. "Careful, Alex. The internet has a funny way of remembering nights like this." She said it softly, yet Alexander leaned into the moment as though applause had already crowned him. Brooke sidled closer to Grace, champagne glass grazing the air near Grace's shoulder. "Sweetheart, middle C is the one your mop keeps missing," she whispered. Her bracelet chimed when her wrist flicked. That chime made Grace blink. The quartet hushed. The ballroom listened. Grace set the broom against a marble column. Without apology, she adjusted the thin headband that corralled her hair, smoothing a stray curl behind her ear. She took one step, then another. The Steinway's surface reflected her like a stranger in borrowed light. Alexander, theatrically generous, pulled the bench back with a showman's flourish and patted the leather. "Seat of power," he said, "for as long as it takes you to fail." Grace didn't sit. She hovered, fingers hovering higher, hovering again, searching for air thick with memory. A church basement in Queens, a crooked upright with chipped keys, moonlight like a metronome on the window pane. She lowered herself at last, spine straight, chin lifted, the posture of someone who has learned not to wilt. "What's your name?" Alexander asked, as if it were a quiz he expected her to miss. "Grace," she said. Nothing else. Her voice was the quiet before hail. Alexander glanced at the crowd, milking them. "Grace," he announced, auditioning for the corner office. A snort, a chuckle, a soft, unkind wave of sound. Grace placed her left hand near the bass, not touching. Her right hovered over the middle register, feeling for the weight of gravity itself. Her thumb trembled and then stilled. The damask walls tightened around the silence. A camera flash cut across the lacquer. In the reflection, she saw her own steady eyes. When her finger finally dropped, it wasn't on middle C. It was lower, a note that breathed like the start of rain. Another followed, then two more, careful, unsure, and the room leaned forward like a single creature who'd heard its name spoken. Alexander's grin held, but his eyelids twitched, a drummer counting time he didn't recognize. Grace paused. The pause had temperature. Somewhere in that held breath lived a secret, the kind that reorders a room. Her next chord landed clean and startling, as if the floor shifted half an inch. Wine stilled. A bracelet stopped chiming. Martha's hands, mid-clap for a waiter, hung there, uncertain. Grace lifted her head and the chandelier light found her eyes. Then she began to play, and the ballroom, for one eternal second, forgot how to laugh. The first measures came like careful footsteps on a dark stair. Grace's left hand set a pulse, low, patient, unafraid, while her right hand drew a thread of melody that seemed older than the room. The grand ballroom's mirrors returned the sound in softer shades. Even the chandeliers shimmered a fraction quieter, as if glass could listen. Alexander Whitmore folded his arms and leaned on the piano lid. "Cute," he said, voice pitched for the nearest circle of tuxedos. "A little church lullaby for the donors." The phrase floated, brittle as spun sugar. A few guests smiled because power told them to. Grace didn't flinch. She let the melody climb, then opened the chord like a window, letting in air that tasted like wet stone and winter light. Somewhere near the back, a server carrying oysters paused mid-step. Olivia Chen's phone, angled to capture Alex's smirk, slipped half an inch toward Grace's hands, recalibrating. Brooke Harrington tilted her head, curiosity peeking through polish. "She's not terrible," she murmured to Daniel Price. "Which is inconvenient." "Amusing," Daniel replied, not entirely amused. "Let's hope she stops before she hits something ambitious." The something ambitious arrived. Grace's fingers quickened, not showy but sure. A turn of phrase, a rub of dissonance that resolved too elegantly to be accidental. Her shoulders dropped, a tell of comfort. This wasn't a stunt. This was a language her body knew. She was no longer following the piano. The piano was following her. Alexander rapped a knuckle on the ebony. "All right, prodigy," he said, smile bearing a hint of nerve. "Name the piece." His tone made knowledge into a dare. Grace's eyes never left the keys. "It doesn't have one," she said. "It's mine." The room adjusted again, a slow tide pulling back from sarcasm. A man near the bar lowered his glass without realizing. Martha Collins pressed two fingers to her lips, as if keeping a secret from spilling out. Grace turned the phrase over, revealing something aching under the polish. It wasn't classical, not exactly, and it didn't beg to be liked. It told the truth in minor keys. The kind of truth that makes you stand up straighter because you're being measured by it. The kind of truth a single mother might play in a kitchen at midnight to keep the walls from caving in. The kind of truth that doesn't need applause. Alexander's grin thinned. "Talent is cheap," he said. "Discipline is expensive. CEO requires both." He said, CEO the way a jeweler says diamond, heavy with ownership. A ripple of assent moved through donors who liked the sound of certainty. Grace shifted, barely, and struck a chord that lingered like a question left at a doorway. "Discipline," she said softly, "is getting up at 4 a.m. to practice before a double shift." She didn't look at him when she said it. The line was plain, unvarnished, and it hung there without begging. Brooke sipped. 4 a.m., she repeated, politely incredulous. "And where exactly does one find a concert hall before sunrise?" "St. Andrew's on 5th, Grace answered, hands never pausing. "The custodian likes company." She smiled, but only with one corner of her mouth remembering. And the melody deepened with the image, dark pews, the red eye of an exit sign, a city breathing outside like a sleeping animal. Olivia lowered her phone entirely now, eyes pinning to a detail in the music, an interval that kept returning like a heartbeat. "Alex," she whispered, "do you hear that?" "Hear what?" he said too fast. "The motif," Olivia whispered. "It's familiar." It was. A four-note climb, light but insistent, curled into the piece like a signature. It tugged at the room's edges, at memory, at something nearly lost. Daniel frowned, searching. Brooke's bracelet didn't chime anymore. Her wrist had gone still. Grace pulled the motif forward, let it hang, and then with a breath she answered her own question in harmony. The music opened, and for a second the ballroom wasn't golden glass but rain-slick sidewalk and steam rising from city grates, a New York painted in sound. Alexander blinked. The exact 4 notes lived somewhere he didn't like to visit. Then Grace pivoted into a sequence that sharpened into unmistakable territory. Not his, not the donors, but theirs, shared, secreted away in the city's bones. Someone in the crowd gasped, not because she erred, but because she didn't. A door of recognition swung on its hinges. Grace pressed into the next chord, one more step into the dangerous beautiful, and the room leaned after her, breath held, as if a shocking truth was about to walk in wearing its own name. The melody clung to the air, circling like a lantern in fog, pulling every ear in the grand ballroom closer. Grace's hands shaped it with a precision that felt older than she was, and the Steinway seemed to respond, its strings vibrating as though relieved to be touched. Alexander Whitmore forced a chuckle. "Adorable," he said, too casual, a charity tune for a charity crowd. But his grin wavered, and his knuckles tapped an impatient rhythm on the piano lid. Guests noticed. They had come to laugh, yet laughter no longer felt safe. Brooke Harrington tilted her head. "That doesn't sound like chance," she whispered. Daniel Price's forehead creased, scanning memory like a ledger. Olivia Chen lowered her phone, eyes narrowing. "Alex," she said carefully, "I've heard this before." The way she said it made silence settle even deeper. Grace wasn't performing anymore. Her posture shifted, shoulders relaxing, as though she had stepped into a place she knew better than anyone in the room. The music swelled, layered with something private. Each phrase sounded like work done in the dark. Early mornings, aching wrists, nights when exhaustion sat heavier than dinner. Yet here it was, transformed into beauty. Alexander leaned down, voice sharpened to a hiss. "Do you even know what it takes to sit in my chair? Numbers, contracts, power, not lullabies." Without looking up, Grace answered with a chord that rang clean. "I know debt," she said softly, "and how interest compounds when you can't pay on time." The music underlined her words, a rhythm of bills stacked and hours stretched. Heads turned. A ripple of unease slid through tuxedos and gowns. Brooke blinked. Did she just talk finance at the piano? Her laugh was thin, but the edges of respect cut through. Grace shifted again, slowing the tempo. Notes spilled like warm light onto cold marble. Her throat worked around a word she nearly swallowed, but she let it out anyway. "For my son." The phrase barely carried, yet it was enough. Someone near the doors whispered, "Single mother," and the words floated like smoke. Martha Collins pressed a hand to her chest. Olivia's lips parted, recognition dawning not just in the music, but in Grace's resolve. Alexander's face flickered. For a fraction, pain cracked his composure. He gripped the piano lid as if it might anchor him. Daniel's voice was quiet but cutting. "Alex, do you know her?" "No," Alexander snapped too fast. The denial echoed louder than any chord. Grace answered with a fragile theme, 4 climbing notes fearless in their simplicity. The ballroom felt the weight of truth disguised as sound. Finally, Grace lifted her gaze. "You made a promise," she said, steady as stone. "And they all heard you." Alexander's teeth showed in a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Promises are cheap," he said. Then he straightened, theatrically tapping the glossy lid twice. "Let's see if you can keep up with me. Play my piece, the one no one knows." Gasps broke the silence. Olivia froze. Brooke's bracelet slipped noiseless down her wrist. Daniel stared. Grace's fingers hovered, suspended above black and white keys like wings trembling before flight. "Play something that doesn't exist?" she asked. Alexander leaned back, basking in control. "Exactly." The chandeliers above trembled faintly, scattering light as if the building itself knew the night was shifting into dangerous territory. Grace's fingers hovered, the silence inside the ballroom thick as velvet. Every chandelier crystal caught the hesitation like 1,000 eyes. Alexander Whitmore reclined against the Steinway, arms folded, lips sharpened into triumph. "Well?" he asked, savoring the pause. "My piece. Let's hear it." The crowd exchanged glances. It was absurd, asking someone to perform a work that didn't exist. But absurdity was Alexander's favorite weapon. He grinned, knowing the weight of the dare would crush her. Grace inhaled, shoulders rising. "If it doesn't exist," she said softly, "then I'll create it." Her hands lowered, and the room exhaled all at once. The first chord landed like a door unlocking, tentative, searching, but alive. She let the motif, the same 4 haunting notes, become the seed. Around it, she built something new. Not imitation, not guessing, but invention. Fragile, dangerous, undeniable. Brooke Harrington leaned closer, her voice barely above a breath. "She's improvising." Olivia Chen's brow furrowed. "No, she's composing." The melody took shape, unfurling in real time. Themes rose, clashed, resolved. Grace's body leaned into the keys, breath syncing with rhythm, eyes unfocused, as if seeing a page no one else could. Each measure was proof of discipline honed in secret, not just practice, survival. Alexander's jaw tightened. He had expected failure, maybe a stumble followed by laughter. Instead, the music climbed into a place he recognized but didn't want to name. A phrase surfaced, sharper, personal, like a mirror held up to his past. Daniel Price muttered under his breath, "Impossible." His hand gripped his champagne flute so hard the stem squeaked. Grace's creation grew bolder. She shifted tempo, built a storm in both hands, then cut it back to near silence. Just the motif, thinned to a whisper. The ballroom leaned so far forward, it seemed the entire city balanced on her shoulders. Then, a revelation. Grace looked up, eyes locking with Alexander. "This," she said between phrases, "isn't your piece. It's ours." The words struck him harder than the sound. For a flicker of time, his mask cracked. He recognized those notes, the ones that lived buried in a memory he had sealed. A memory tied to someone he had left behind. The audience sensed it. A murmur rippled, soft but electric. Phones tilted closer, trying to capture not just the performance but Alexander's unraveling face. He slammed his palm on the lid, startling gasps. "Stop!" His voice fractured. "Enough of this charade." Grace's hands froze above the keys, the last chord hanging like a question unanswered. Silence roared louder than applause. Martha Collins stepped forward from the back of the room, her voice steady. She played. "You promised." Everyone heard it. Alexander's eyes darted across the crowd. Pressure built, a storm closing in. His wealth, his reputation, his armor, all cornered by a cleaning lady's truth. Grace stood, spine straight, no tremor in her voice. "You can break your promise, Mr. Whitmore, but they'll never forget that you did." The chandelier light caught on every camera lens, hundreds of tiny red dots burning holes into Alexander's facade. He opened his mouth, but the words lodged like glass in his throat. The night had turned. The man who mocked was now the one on trial, and every heartbeat in the room knew it. Alexander's smile faltered, caught between arrogance and panic. Cameras glowed like embers, recording every second. The ballroom, once his stage, now felt like a tribunal. He opened his mouth, but only a rasp came out. Grace remained by the Steinway, her hands still close to the keys, her body rooted in dignity. "What's the matter, Mr. Whitmore?" she asked quietly. "Afraid the truth will outplay you?" A ripple of shock moved through the audience. Brooke Harrington's glass tilted, spilling champagne down her wrist without notice. Daniel Price whispered, "Truth? What truth?" Olivia Chen's gaze sharpened. She wasn't looking at Grace anymore. She was staring at Alexander, searching his face for cracks. Something in her expression said she had seen the motif before too. Grace touched the keys again, softer now. Just the 4 notes, over and over, like a beacon. "These," she said, "aren't just mine. They belong to someone else too. Someone who once believed in music before money." Alexander's jaw clenched. "Enough." His voice was sharp, brittle, but Grace didn't stop. Her voice trembled at first, then steadied. "Years ago, a boy used to play these same notes in a church basement. Not for fame, not for donors, just for the love of sound. He promised he'd never let that part of himself die." She paused, her eyes cutting into him. "That boy was you, Alexander." Gasps cracked across the ballroom. A woman near the front clutched her pearls. Daniel's eyes widened, almost gleeful at the scandal. Brooke whispered, "No," and set her glass down, rattled. Alexander stepped forward, fists clenched at his sides. "Lies," he spat, but his voice lacked conviction. The recognition in his eyes betrayed him before the word even left his mouth. Grace pressed into the motif once more, louder, pulling memory from stone. "I was there," she said. "I cleaned the pews while you practiced. You never knew my name, but I knew yours. You were the boy who made music sound like hope, until you buried it under boardrooms and greed." Silence cracked open into murmurs. Guests turned their phones, capturing Alexander's every twitch. Olivia whispered, almost to herself, This will break headlines by morning." Martha Collins stepped forward, arms crossed. "She's not lying. I remember those nights too." Her voice carried the weight of testimony, not gossip. Alexander shook his head, pacing like a trapped animal. "This is manipulation. She's playing you all." But his hands shook, and the tremor betrayed more than denial. Grace rose fully from the bench now, no longer the cleaning lady hiding in corners. She stood eye to eye with the billionaire CEO, her presence filling the room as much as the music had. "You promised me a chance. Tonight I took it, and I reminded you of who you used to be. The choice now is yours, Alex. Honor your word, or prove to everyone here that you've lost the last note of your own humanity." The words hit harder than the music. Cameras recorded. Donors shifted. The room hung between past and present, waiting to see if the man who mocked would be man enough to answer. Alexander's breath came shallow, shoulders stiff under the ballroom lights. The cameras, once his allies, now burned against him. He lifted his chin, summoning the mask that had carried him through boardrooms, headlines, and billion-dollar deals. "She's lying," he declared, forcing steadiness into his tone. "A maid inventing stories to shame me. That's all this is." But the words fell flat. No laughter followed. The donors shifted uneasily, caught between loyalty and doubt. Brooke Harrington crossed her arms, her glossy smile gone. Daniel Price's gaze sharpened, already calculating the fallout. Olivia Chen didn't even blink. She simply whispered, "The internet won't forgive this." Grace remained by the Steinway, calm as stone in a storm. She touched the keys again, playing the motif once more, gentle, deliberate. "If it were a lie," she said softly, "your eyes wouldn't have answered before your mouth did." A murmur ran through the room. Phones lifted higher. Alexander's jaw flexed. He turned sharply, addressing the crowd instead of her. "This is nothing but performance theater. You came here for my vision, my leadership, not a sob story from—" He stopped. The word hung poisonous on his tongue. Maid. He had been about to say it, but even he knew it would finish him. Grace rose from the bench, meeting his eyes head on. "Say it," she dared, her voice cut clean, resonant. "Call me what you think I am, because tonight, the only title that matters is the one you promised." Martha Collins stepped closer from the back. "Everyone here heard him," she said firmly. "The challenge was his. The victory is hers." The tension snapped tighter. Donors nodded. Some clapped hesitantly, then louder until the sound swelled into a rhythm Alexander couldn't silence. For the first time in his career, applause wasn't for him. He raised both hands as if to physically push the sound back. "Enough! I built this empire with discipline, with sacrifice. I won't hand it over because of a stunt." Grace's expression softened, but her words were sharper than steel. "Discipline?" she asked. "Discipline is scrubbing your own hands raw to pay rent. Sacrifice is raising a child alone with no safety net, no applause. You don't own those words. People like me do." The ballroom froze. Guests weren't looking at Alexander anymore. Every eye, every lens, every breath pointed to Grace. Alexander's lips trembled. He tried to laugh, but it came out hollow. "You think you can run Whitmore Capital? You'd drown in a week." Grace didn't flinch. "Maybe," she said simply. "But drowning, honestly, is worth more than breathing under lies." The line struck. Phones captured it. And in that moment, Alexander knew the narrative was gone. He wasn't the billionaire CEO commanding admiration. He was a man cornered by his own arrogance, exposed by the woman he tried to humiliate. He stepped back, sweat tracing along his hairline. The applause rose again, swelling into something undeniable. Grace stood in the light, transformed. Not a maid, not invisible, but a symbol that no chandelier could outshine. And the question hanging in the room was no longer if Alexander would keep his promise. It was whether he had the courage left to face himself. The applause echoed like judgment, swelling under the vaulted ceiling until Alexander could hardly breathe. His empire had been built on dominance, but now the crowd tasted something new, resistance, and they liked it. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice faltering, "you're being deceived. This woman has rehearsed a trick." "No trick," Grace cut in, her tone sharp but steady, "just memory." She pressed the motif again, 4 simple notes, and the sound wrapped around the room like a rope. "You played them first. You taught me without even knowing." Phones tilted closer. Donors leaned forward. Olivia Chen didn't blink, her expression a hawk's. Brooke Harrington whispered, "She's unraveling him." Alexander slammed a hand on the Steinway lid. The noise cracked across marble, startling gasps. "Stop twisting the past. I was a child. Music was nothing. I grew up." Grace turned toward him, eyes burning. "No, you gave up." Her words pierced sharper than sound. "You traded the part of yourself that could feel for the part that could own." The ballroom gasped again, not for her accusation, but for the way Alexander flinched. His armor slipped. For a moment, they saw the boy she described, and it terrified him. Daniel Price seized the silence. "Alex," he said, voice oily, "whether you like it or not, this is out. If she's telling the truth, it's a PR disaster. If she's lying, it's worse, because you'll look afraid of her." Olivia added, crisp and cold, "You made the challenge on camera. You can't erase it. Deny her and the internet will crown her instead of you." Alexander's chest heaved. He looked at the cameras, at the hundreds of glowing eyes. Then he looked back at Grace, who hadn't moved, who hadn't broken. "Why?" he asked suddenly, voice raw. "Why bring this here? Why me?" Grace's expression shifted. Not anger, but grief. She laid her palm flat on the keys. No sound, just touch. "Because my son deserves better than silence," she said. The crowd hushed. Even the air seemed to stop. Alexander blinked, confused. "Your son, what does—" But Grace was already playing again, the motif carrying new weight, layered with chords that sounded like lullabies drenched in struggle. Her voice was steady, almost tender. "He deserves to know that dignity can survive even the cruelest rooms, that no matter how powerful the man, no one decides his mother's worth." Martha Collins stepped forward, nodding firmly. "She's right. Tonight wasn't about money, Alex, it was about dignity." The applause rose again, steadier, stronger. Some guests stood. Phones captured every angle, Grace lit by chandeliers, Alexander shrinking in their glare. And then the words came, whispered from the back, but sharp enough to cut through the clapping. "Is the boy his?" The room froze. Alexander's head snapped up, eyes blazing. Grace's fingers halted mid-phrase, suspended above the keys. Her silence was louder than denial. Gasps rippled across the ballroom. Olivia's lips parted. Brooke's hand shot to her mouth. Daniel muttered, "My God." Alexander staggered back a step, sweat on his brow, fury in his eyes. "Don't you dare." But Grace finally lifted her gaze. Her voice was quiet, unshaken. "You promised me once before, Alex, and you broke it. Tonight, I gave you a chance to keep one." And the chandelier light swung, as if the entire hotel leaned in, waiting for the final note of truth. The chandelier trembled as if it too awaited her answer. Grace's hands hovered above the Steinway, silent. She didn't need to play. The music already lived in the tension between her and Alexander Whitmore. "Is it true?" a man near the front asked. His voice carried the weight of everyone's curiosity. "Is the boy yours?" The ballroom held its breath. Grace's lips parted, but she didn't rush. Instead, she lowered her hands and struck the motif again. 4 notes, sharp and deliberate. The sound sliced through silence like a verdict. "Yes," she said finally. Her voice shook once, then steadied. "He's yours, Alex." Gasps cracked across the room. Brooke Harrington nearly dropped her glass. Daniel Price's jaw unhinged. Olivia Chen's pen, forgotten in her hand, clattered against the floor. Alexander staggered back a step, as though the air had been punched from him. His carefully curated mask shattered. "No," he rasped, but it was too late. His denial carried no weight. Every face in the ballroom had already seen the truth break across him like lightning. Grace rose from the bench, no longer a shadow in a maid's uniform, but a storm in plain sight. "I begged you once," she said, her voice trembling with years of silence breaking. "I begged you to be there. For him, for us. You chose a contract over a cradle. You chose profit over your own blood." The audience erupted. Murmurs, gasps, phones snapping, recording. Some guests shook their heads in disbelief. Others whispered with electric thrill. Martha Collins pressed a hand to her mouth, tears glinting in her eyes. Alexander tried to speak, his voice strangled. "Grace, stop." But she didn't. Her words cut sharper than any melody. "You mocked me tonight because you thought I was invisible. But I carried your son when you vanished. I raised him while you wore your empire like armor. And when you dared me to play, you forgot the one thing you can't bury. Truth has a sound, and everyone here has heard it." The applause didn't come yet. Instead, the room sat stunned, heavy with the weight of revelation. Donors who had once laughed at Alexander now whispered to each other, eyes darting toward the cameras. The story was no longer a private humiliation. It was about to explode across headlines. Olivia Chen whispered, almost reverently, "The billionaire CEO, the cleaning lady, a hidden child. By sunrise, the world will know." Alexander's fists clenched, his face flushing crimson. "Do you want revenge, Grace? Is that it?" His voice cracked. "You think this will ruin me?" Grace's gaze locked on his, fierce but unbroken. "This isn't revenge, this is recognition. For me, for him, for every time you pretended we didn't exist." The ballroom erupted, not with applause this time, but with voices, questions, accusations. How old is the boy? Did he abandon her? What will happen now? The chaos swelled, a tidal wave of scrutiny. Alexander pressed his palms to the piano lid, trembling. For the first time, the man who owned every room could not command a single voice inside it. Grace, still standing, lifted her chin. The light from the chandelier caught her eyes like fire. She didn't need to play another note. The truth had become its own music, and it drowned out everything else. Chaos rolled through the ballroom like a storm tide. Questions, whispers, cameras flashing. Alexander Whitmore stood at the center, drowning in light he no longer controlled. His throat bobbed, searching for words that would not come. "Listen," he barked finally, voice raw. "This woman is exploiting you. She thinks she can manipulate sympathy." "Manipulate?" Grace's voice cut through, sharp and calm. "I cleaned your floors while raising your son alone. Sympathy isn't what I want, Alex. Respect is." The murmurs swelled. A woman in pearls shook her head. "You left her with your child," she whispered to her husband. Phones caught it, feeding the fire. Alexander's chest heaved. "You think this stunt makes you worthy? Running a company requires vision, strength." Grace stepped closer, not shrinking from him. "Strength." Her voice trembled, then steadied like a bowstring. "Strength is choosing diapers over dinner so your child eats. Strength is facing the world every day, knowing the man who should have stood beside you walked away. Don't preach strength to me, Alex. I lived it." The room erupted in applause, this time fierce and unanimous. Guests rose from their chairs, the tide had turned fully. Alexander flinched as if each clap struck him. Daniel Price whispered, "This is over," to no one in particular. Olivia Chen stood rigid, already calculating headlines. Brooke Harrington wiped under her eye, smudging mascara, whispering, "My God, she's magnificent." Alexander turned back to Grace, voice shaking. "What do you want? Money? A position? Tell me what will shut you up." Grace's eyes burned with quiet fire. "I don't want hush money. I don't want your pity. I want my son to grow up knowing his mother was never afraid of you. That's the only legacy I need." The words landed like thunder. Applause thundered louder, echoing off marble and glass. For the first time, Alexander couldn't meet anyone's eyes. He staggered, one hand braced against the Steinway, his empire's weight pressing down on him. The billionaire CEO who once mocked the cleaning lady now looked smaller than the boy who had once played in a church basement. Grace didn't press further. She didn't need to. The silence she allowed spoke louder than accusation. The cameras captured everything: her dignity, his collapse. The ballroom transformed into a court of truth. Martha Collins stepped up, standing beside Grace like a shield. "You've seen enough," she told the crowd firmly. "You know what happened here." Alexander's voice broke into the hush, barely audible. "Grace." He choked on the name, not as a CEO, but as a man unraveling. "What do I do?" Grace studied him, steady, unpitying. "Keep the promise," she said. "Not for me, for him." The chandelier light swayed above them, scattering shards of gold. The ballroom stood still, balanced on the edge of redemption or ruin. The ballroom returned to silence, but the echo of that night would never fade. Grace walked away not as a maid mocked by the wealthy, but as a woman who proved that dignity shines brighter than gold. Her music silenced arrogance, and her truth became impossible to deny. This story reminds us of something we must never forget. No one is greater than another. Money, titles, and power do not make a person worth more. What defines us is how we treat each other, whether with respect, compassion, or cruelty. And humiliation has no place in a heart that knows its own worth. We should never accept humiliation, and we should never be the ones to cause it. Because every time we lift someone instead of breaking them down, we prove that dignity and kindness are stronger than arrogance. If you have lived through a moment like this, if you faced humiliation, or if you fought to protect your dignity, share your story in the comments. You might give someone else the courage they've been waiting for. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this touching story. Tell us in the comments what part moved you the most. Subscribe and turn on the bell to receive more stories that inspire and transform. Leave a like if you believe in the invisible strength of dignity and family. And most of all, thank you for being part of this community that believes in stories with soul. Before you go, watch the story I'll leave here on the left. I'm sure it will also move you and make you reflect.